Good morning, everyone. I'm Elaine Newton, and welcome to my kitchen. And let me begin by thanking all of you who have sent notes or emails or phoned to just wonder how we were doing up here in Canada with our distancing and our self-isolating. We're fine. I wish you all to be safe and well. And may I say thank you for the little notes that told me what you were reading, and above all, for those of you who wanted to know what I was reading and what I would recommend now. And that's how this video began, because we thought it might be fun if I just came on for a while with you in your living room, in your pajamas or whatever, and I talked a little bit about some of the books I've been reading. I must say we're doing very well up here because I'm doing exactly what I like best, watching movies and reading. I thought I would begin with the book that has been sort of the #1 buzz that's been going on since I left in March, and it continues to be so. And that's the very controversial Jeanine Cummins' American Dirt. It's very timely, it's very compelling, at times deeply moving, and it is a significant, propelling read. May I just say those things? Because, of course, both its literary and social merit got somehow entangled in a morass of controversy that is the kind of thing that happens in the publication world. But I'm sad that it happened to this book, because I think it's a book well worth reading. Let me just briefly talk a little bit about the story for those of you who don't know it. Linda Perez owns a bookstore, and she must desperately flee from Mexico with her 8-year-old son, who is precocious and at times delightful, and other times, most of the time, terrified, because their fearless journalist husband and father has set in motion a revenge from one of the most powerful of the drug cartels. It's the Jardines, and they come into the garden one day when a celebration is taking place in Linda's home, and they massacre 16 members of the family, including her husband. And she knows she must flee. And she also knows that as she is fleeing, there will be behind her people who are attempting desperately to capture and probably kill her and her son. And so, fleeing for their lives, they head up north, and they join the whole swell of immigrants who are desperately trying to make their way north into some kind of asylum in the United States. And the journey is, of course, perilous, but it's more than that. It's gut-wrenching, and it's brutal, and it's violent, and they meet with all kinds of betrayal, but they also find kindness, and they find some generosity and support in sometimes very unexpected places. They travel by bus, they travel by La Bestia, which is the train, and they travel on the top of the train. And just getting to the top of the train is totally precarious. You can imagine a little 8-year-old boy, and that's really early in the beginning of the book, so you're tense right from the beginning, I must say. They travel by bus, by train, but then there are harrowing chapters when they are traveling in the desert, on foot, with a coyote who is a sort of a guide, and things don't always go as expected. In fact, they often don't go as expected. They're in a situation such as is unimaginable to most of us. She always knows that pursuit is there going on behind her. But it is this intense love she has for her son, and of course, the need to keep him safe at all times that propels her on and propels us on too, as anxiety mounts on every page. And ultimately, you are emotionally involved in what's going on. You're not just engaged. It's very suspenseful, and it's significant. But it is a thriller, and it tends at times to become a little bit too much on the surface. I thought that might have had to do with the narration a bit. Um, it's a book that we should be reading now because, first of all, it's full of information, and second of all, it triggers thoughts that you probably didn't really have before this book. Jeanine Cummins, however, is neither Mexican nor is she an immigrant. And these are sensitive days in the literary world. And so, and in her author's, I should tell you, in her author's note, she has written this: I wrote this to honor the thousands of stories we might never get to hear. So we will realize that these are people. And that's what she says is the impulse behind the book. She's also spoken of 4 years of very meticulous research in Mexico, in border situations, of the dozens and dozens of interviews she has led and been part of, and the many, many hours that she has spent reading documents, reading personal accounts, reading police and border crossing statistics and records. So she has talked always about how she understood the need for authenticity right from the beginning. But of course, she was immediately accused of cultural appropriation. Clearly, people sensitive in these areas felt that she had appropriated their culture, their lives, their stories, in order to write what they perceived as being a calculated bestseller. And indeed, even before the book was published, announcements went out, publication announcements went out to tell us that this was one of the largest book auctions in recent publication history. 9 companies vied to be able to publish this book. She was given an unprecedented financial advance for the book. But the ugly controversy was, of course, around what James Baldwin once said of William Styron's writing, The Confessions of Nat Turner. Do you remember? He once said, you can't sing the blues unless you've paid your dues. It's that you have to be one of the people you're talking about. Nadine Gordimer, of course, has always combated that. She wrote in whatever voice she felt like. She once said very angrily at a press conference, I can be an ant or a table or a cabbage if I want. I'm a writer. So that's the controversy that swirled around. They said that her portraits were inaccurate, that this was a form of cultural imperialism. It was colonization. She had stolen other people's stories. What right did she have to speak about this? She had borrowed understanding from other people. She had, of course, plagiarized, they said. And Oprah, who had contracted with her to make this one of her books, backed out from the contract. Oprah could not want the controversy that was going on. Having said all that, may I tell you that the book has been one of the #1 bestsellers in the United States ever since. From a literary perspective, I think we should agree that the book has a polemical basis. Lydia's voice on the page, and it is told with alternating point of views, is urgent, it's compelling, it's also instructive. Her growing awareness, her frightened poignancy. I, however, would have hoped for more, and the writing workshop term is interioricity. I would have wanted more to be in her head, no less a little in the superficial, that's a terrible word to use for this book, but rather in the external narration that was going on. And because the narration is going on with other characters, none of whom have very much depth, I must say, that sense of interior is lost in the book, and one wishes for more character development. But let me say that the narrative arc is clearly done, and that the stark simplicity of that engages us. It engages us in the horror of the immediate crisis. And I think that's one of the things she wanted to do. It's an urgent read. You are tense when you are reading this book, may I say. It's an eye-opener, too, for those of us who don't know really what's going on the southern border. This gives the sense of that, although the naysayers say it's just the illusion of that. But it did give a sense. I think by the time I was finished, the book had become for me quite deeply felt. Not intimate enough, but it's that feltness of the situation that was her intent, and it came off. So it's a book I would say, yeah, do read. Do read. You owe it to yourself. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll see you next time. And in the meantime, please stay safe.